After 20 years of loyal service, Mabel Jenkins never expected to be called into her boss's office that Monday morning. She straightened her silver hawk brooch, a gift from Mr. Hawk himself years ago, and walked through his office door with no idea that her life was about to change forever. What happens next will not only shake the foundations of Hawk Industries, but reveal secrets that some would kill to keep hidden. Mabel Jenkins stepped through the glass doors of Hawk Industries at exactly 7:45 a.m., just like she had every Monday for the past 20 years. She smoothed down her navy blue skirt and touched the small silver hawk brooch pinned to her blouse. Mr. Hawk had given it to her on her 10-year work anniversary. "Hawks are loyal," he had said with a rare smile. "Just like you, Mabel." The lobby seemed different today. Ted, the security guard, wouldn't meet her eyes when she signed in. "Beautiful morning, isn't it, Ted?" Mabel said. "Sure is, Ms. Jenkins," Ted mumbled, looking down at his desk. Mabel felt a tiny knot form in her stomach but pushed the feeling away. Maybe Ted was just having a bad day. She rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The marketing team was already setting up for their morning meeting in the glass conference room. Usually, they waved at her. Today, they suddenly became very interested in their papers when she walked by. At her desk outside Mr. Hawk's office, Mabel found a coffee cup waiting for her. Her name was written on it in Tiffany's bubbly handwriting. Tiffany had been shadowing Mabel for the past 2 weeks. She was fresh out of college with bright eyes and fingers that flew across a keyboard faster than Mabel could follow. "Good morning, Ms. Jenkins," Tiffany chirped, bouncing over from the copy room. "I got you a vanilla latte. I remembered it's your favorite." "That's very thoughtful, dear. Thank you." Mabel hung up her coat and sat at her desk. She noticed a small box of tissues had appeared next to her computer. The knot in her stomach grew tighter. Mabel powered on her computer and began her morning routine. First, check Mr. Hawk's schedule. Then, sort his emails by importance. Next, prepare the files he would need for his 10:30 meeting with the board. At 9:15, her desk phone rang. "Mr. Hawk would like to see you in his office," said Ms. Winters from Human Resources. Her voice sounded too soft, too careful. Mabel stood up, straightened her brooch, and walked to the large oak door that led to Mr. Hawk's office. She had opened this door thousands of times. She had brought him coffee when he worked late nights during the company's rough early years. She had watched his children grow up through the photos on his desk. She had sent flowers when his mother died and covered for him during his messy divorce. She knocked twice, then entered. Mr. Hawk sat behind his massive desk. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his blue eyes focused on his computer screen. Ms. Winters sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. Neither of them smiled. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Hawk?" Mabel said. Mr. Hawk finally looked up. "Yes, Mabel. Please sit down." Mabel sat beside Ms. Winters, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mabel," Mr. Hawk began, folding his hands on the desk, "you've been with Hawk Industries for a long time. 20 years today, actually," Mabel said with a small smile. Mr. Hawk blinked rapidly. "Is it? Well, that's quite a milestone." He cleared his throat. "Mabel, the company is moving in a new direction. We need people with modern skills, digital expertise, social media knowledge." The room suddenly felt very cold. "I've been taking those computer classes at the community college," Mabel said quickly. "And I've been learning about Twitter from my nephew." Mr. Hawk shook his head. "I'm afraid we've made our decision. Today will be your last day at Hawk Industries." The words hit Mabel like a physical blow. 20 years. 20 years of loyalty, of early mornings and late nights. of remembering birthdays and anniversaries when Mr. Hawk forgot, of rearranging his schedule so he could attend his daughter's college graduation. "I don't understand," she whispered. Ms. Winters slid a folder across the table. "This explains your severance package. 2 months' salary. Health insurance will continue until the end of the month. We have a box for your personal items," Mr. Hawk said, not looking at her. "Security will escort you out once you're packed." "Security?" Mabel's voice cracked. "Victor, I've known you for 20 years. Do you really think I need security?" Mr. Hawk flinched at the use of his first name. "It's company policy, Mabel. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. 20 years reduced to nothing personal." Mabel stood up on shaky legs. "May I at least finish the day? Help Tiffany transition?" "Tiffany is ready to take over," Mr. Hawk said. "We made sure of that." Mabel suddenly understood. The shadowing, the questions about her filing system. They had been planning this for weeks. Ms. Winters handed her a small cardboard box. Mabel walked to her desk like a sleepwalker. She packed her family photos, her spare reading glasses, the mug her granddaughter had painted. 20 years fit into one small box. As security walked her to the elevator, Mabel saw Tiffany already sitting at her desk, already answering her phone, already taking her place as if Mabel had never existed. Outside on the sidewalk, Mabel looked up at the gleaming Hawk Industries tower stretching into the sky. She had helped build this company from when it was just 3 employees in a tiny office. 20 years, she whispered to herself as the first tear fell. 20 years. Mabel stood frozen on the sidewalk until the cold March wind pushed through her thin blouse. She hadn't grabbed her coat. It still hung on the rack beside what used to be her desk. 20 years at the same company, and she couldn't even remember to take her coat. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. Mabel clutched the small box of belongings on her lap, afraid to look at the other passengers. Would they see the shame on her face? Would they know she had been thrown away like yesterday's newspaper? Her apartment building looked shabbier than it had that morning. The paint peeling around the windows, the cracked step at the entrance. Had it always looked this way? Or was she just seeing it differently now? Inside her apartment, Mabel set the box down on her kitchen table and stood in the silence. No phone ringing, no emails pinging, just the soft tick of the wall clock that had been a gift from Dale before he died. Dale. What would he say if he were here? Probably something like, "Their loss, maybe, baby. Their loss." Dale had never liked Victor Hawk. "That man would sell his own mother for $1, he used to say. Mabel hadn't changed out of her work clothes. She should change. She should eat something. She should. Instead, she sank into a kitchen chair and stared at the box that held 20 years of memories. Slowly, she began to unpack it. A framed photo of her and Dale at the company picnic 12 years ago. The coffee mug her granddaughter Emma had painted with wobbly purple flowers. 3 pairs of reading glasses. 1, hers, 2 belonging to Mr. Hawk, who always forgot where he left them. At the bottom of the box was a stack of birthday cards. Every year, the employees of Hawk Industries signed a card for each other's birthdays. Mabel flipped through them. The early ones had personal notes from Mr. Hawk. "Couldn't run this place without you, Mabel. Another year of keeping me on track." The heart and soul of Hawk Industries. The later cards just had his signature. No message. When had he stopped seeing her? Mabel moved to her desk in the corner of the living room and opened the drawer where she kept her bills. The pile seemed taller than she remembered. The medical bills from her knee surgery last year. the rent notice showing another increase starting next month. The property taxes on Dale's small fishing cabin up north. The one place she couldn't bear to sell after he died. 2 months' severance pay wouldn't stretch far. At 61, who would hire her? Too young for full retirement benefits, too old. For most companies, looking for secretaries. Administrative assistants, they called them now. With computer skills, social media expertise, modern skills. Mabel pulled out a yellow legal pad and began to calculate. If she cut back on groceries, if she canceled her cable TV, if she stopped sending Emma money for college, maybe 6 months before her savings ran out, 6 months to find a new job. The phone rang, startling her. For a moment, her heart leapt. Maybe it was Mr. Hawk calling to say it was all a mistake. "We need you back, Mabel. The office is falling apart without you." But it was just Patty from her Thursday night bingo group. "You'll never guess who won the jackpot last week when you didn't come," Patty said, not waiting for Mabel to speak. "Edna Wilkins. Can you believe it? After complaining for months about never winning?" Mabel hadn't told anyone about losing her job. The words stuck in her throat like dry bread. "Mabel, are you there?" "Yes, sorry. Bad connection." Mabel couldn't bear to say the words out loud. Not yet. "Listen, Patty, can I call you back tomorrow? I'm in the middle of something." That night, Mabel couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Victor Hawk. When they first met, he was 35, ambitious but decent. They'd worked side by side in that tiny office on Main Street. She knew how he took his coffee, black with 1 sugar, his favorite lunch spots, the deli on 7th that made pastrami just the way he liked it, his children's birthdays, Lily on April 3rd, Michael on November 18th. She'd covered for him during his divorce when he needed to leave early for lawyer meetings. She was the first person he told when Lily got into medical school. "Can you believe it, Mabel? My daughter, a doctor." When had it all changed? Was it when the company went public 3 years ago? When the new board members arrived with their talk of streamlining and efficiency? Or had he always seen her as just another office tool that could be replaced when it got too old? Mabel turned over, burying her face in Dale's pillow. 5 years since he died, and she still slept on her side of the bed. "What am I going to do now?" she whispered into the darkness. A week crawled by. Mabel applied for 7 jobs, 3 secretarial positions, 2 receptionist roles, a file clerk at the hospital, and even a cashier job at the grocery store down the street. She heard back from only 2. "We're looking for someone with more digital experience," said one. "I'm afraid you're overqualified," said the other, which Mabel knew was code for too old. She tried to stick to a routine. Wake up at 6:30 a.m., just like when she had a job. Shower, dress in nice clothes, eat breakfast. Look for jobs online until lunch. Walk to the park in the afternoon to save on heating. Dinner at 5:30 p.m. TV until 9:20 p.m. Bed, the routine helped, but the silence was crushing. No phone calls to DT Sauer answer. No meetings to schedule. No Mr. Hawk asking where he'd left his glasses, even though they were right on top of his head. On Friday morning, Mabel decided to organize her home office. If she couldn't find a job, maybe she could at least find some peace in putting things in order. She sorted through old tax returns, instruction manuals for appliances she no longer owned, and birthday cards from Emma. At the back of her desk, drawer behind a stack of Dale's fishing magazines she couldn't bear to throw away, Mabel found a small plastic case containing a flash drive. The label read, Hawk Backup 2019. "Oh," Mabel said out loud, startling herself. She remembered now. Mr. Hawk had asked her to back up some files before a system upgrade. He had been very specific about which folders to include. She had meant to return it, but that was the week of the big merger with Thomson Electronics. Things had been so hectic. The flash drive had ended up in her purse, then her desk drawer, forgotten. Mabel turned the flash drive over in her hands. She should return it. But the thought of walking into Hawk Industries, of seeing Tiffany at her desk, made her stomach twist. She could mail it, she supposed, or Mabel bit her lip. The files were 5 years old, probably not important anymore. But she was curious. What had been so important to Mr. Hawk back then? She booted up her old laptop and plugged in the flash drive. A folder appeared labeled Hawk Files 2019. Inside were dozens of subfolders with boring names. Q3 reports, Thomson merger, marketing budgets. But there was one folder that caught her eye. Project Falcon. Mabel frowned. She didn't remember any Project Falcon. Mr. Hawk shared everything with her, especially back then. She clicked on the folder. It contained emails, spreadsheets, and PDF documents. Mabel opened an email from Mr. Hawk to Randall Price, the head of the board. Randall, transfers to Cayman account complete. Zurich next week. Will update when finished. Cayman account? Zurich? That sounded like Mabel opened another email. Price, inspector taken care of. Will sign off on materials regardless of test. Results. VH. Mabel's heart began to race. She opened a spreadsheet titled Funding Adjustments. It showed money being moved from an account labeled Employee Retirement Fund to something called Falcon Holdings. Millions of dollars. With trembling hands, Mabel opened a PDF document. It was a safety report for Hawk Industries' new building. Material, Hawkcrete. The report showed the material failed 3 safety tests. But another document, dated 2 weeks later, showed the material had passed inspection. The inspector's signature was different on the 2 reports. Mabel sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was proof of crimes. Serious ones. Money laundering, bribery, fraud. She opened more files. The evidence was overwhelming. Mr. Hawk and several board members had been stealing money from the company, from the retirement funds of employees like her, and hiding it overseas. They had bribed officials to approve unsafe building materials. They had lied to shareholders. Mabel's hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely use the mouse. If these buildings were unsafe, if people got hurt? She thought about the Hawkcrete advertisements that had been everywhere last year. Building America's Future. Hawk Industries had sold the material to construction companies across the country. Schools, hospitals, apartment buildings. Mabel closed the laptop and stood up. She needed to think. She needed air. She grabbed her coat and walked to the small park 2 blocks from her apartment. The March air was cold but fresh. Mabel sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings. What should she do with this information? She could turn Mr. Hawk in. After how he treated her, maybe he deserved it. The files showed he had been stealing from his own company, from the retirement funds of employees like her. Funds she could have used now that she was jobless. But she thought about the hundreds of people who worked at Hawk Industries. If the company collapsed under a scandal, they would all lose their jobs. And what about Mr. Hawk's family? Lily had just had a baby last year. Mabel still had the photo of tiny Zoe Hawk on her refrigerator. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Mr. Hawk had been forced into this by the board. Maybe if she talked to him, he would make it right, or maybe he would make sure she never talked to anyone again. Mabel shivered, and not from the cold. This wasn't some TV show. This was real life. Powerful men like Victor Hawk didn't go to jail. They didn't get caught. They made problems and people disappear. But she couldn't just do nothing. Not when people might be living and working in unsafe buildings. Not when hard-working employees might lose their retirement savings. "What would you do, Dale?" she whispered, looking up at the gray sky. The answer came to her, clear as if Dale were sitting right beside her. "Do the right thing, maybe, baby. You always do." But what was the right thing? Mabel barely slept that night. Her mind kept replaying the files she had seen, the numbers, the emails, the changed signatures on the safety reports. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined buildings crumbling, people getting hurt, retirement funds vanishing. By morning, she had decided to talk to Mr. Hawk first. Despite everything, they had 20 years of history. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he could fix this before anyone got hurt. Mabel picked up her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. After 2 rings, a bright young voice answered. "Mr. Hawk's office. This is Tiffany speaking." Mabel's words caught in her throat. Hearing someone else answer that phone, her phone, made her stomach twist. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Tiffany asked. "Yes, hello," Mabel finally said. "This is Mabel Jenkins. I need to speak with Mr. Hawk. It's urgent." "Oh, Ms. Jenkins," Tiffany's voice went up an octave. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Hawk is very busy today. Can I take a message?" "Please tell him it's about Project Falcon," Mabel said firmly. There was a pause. "I'll let him know you called. Can I get your number?" "He has my number," Mabel said, and hung up. She waited all day. Mr. Hawk didn't call. The next morning, Mabel sent an email to his personal address, the one he used for matters he wanted to keep private. "Victor, I need to speak with you about Project Falcon. It's urgent and concerns safety issues with Hawkcrete. Please call me." Mabel, no response. On the 3rd day, Mabel decided to go to the Hawk Industries building in person. She put on her best suit, the navy blue one she had worn to company events, pinned on her silver Hawk brooch, and took the bus downtown. At the security desk, Ted wouldn't look her in the eye. "I need to see Mr. Hawk," Mabel said. "It's important." "I'm sorry, Ms. Jenkins," Ted mumbled. "I have instructions not to let you up." Mabel blinked in surprise. "What? Why?" Ted shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hawk left specific instructions that you're not allowed on the premises. I'm real sorry. If it were up to me—" "It's all right, Ted," Mabel said, though it wasn't all right at all. "Not your fault." Outside, Mabel sat on a bench across from the Hawk Industries tower, watching people come and go. She had given 20 years to that building, 20 years of early mornings and late nights, and now she couldn't even get past the front door. Mr. Hawk was avoiding her. He knew why she was trying to reach him. He knew about the flash drive. On the bus ride home, Mabel considered her options. She could go to the police. But what if they didn't believe her? Or worse, what if they were friends with Mr. Hawk? He played golf with the police chief every Sunday. She could go to a newspaper, but Mr. Hawk's lawyers would bury the story. They might even sue her for stealing company files. She could go to the FBI, but would they take an old secretary seriously? Would they act quickly enough to prevent people from getting hurt if those buildings were really unsafe? Back at her apartment, Mabel made a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table. She opened the laptop and looked at the files again. The more she read, the worse it got. The money trail was complex, but it was clear that millions had been diverted from the company into private offshore accounts, and the Hawkcrete safety issues were even more disturbing. Internal emails showed the material could crack under pressure or extreme temperatures. But instead of fixing the problems, Mr. Hawk and the board had chosen to bribe inspectors and falsify reports. People's lives were at risk. And for what? More money? Mr. Hawk already had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Mabel closed the laptop and sipped her tea. She thought about the employees at Hawk Industries. People like Sandy from accounting, who was putting 2 kids through college. Or Miguel from maintenance, whose wife needed expensive medical treatments. If the company collapsed because of a scandal, they would all suffer. But if someone got hurt because of those unsafe buildings, if a school collapsed with children inside, Mabel rubbed her temples. She needed help. She needed someone who understood the company, but whom she could trust. And suddenly, she knew exactly who to call. Greta Sanderson had started at Hawk Industries just a year after Mabel. She was Mr. Hawk's executive assistant, handling the company's legal and financial matters, while Mabel managed his schedule and personal affairs. They had never been close. Greta was always too ambitious, too focused on climbing the corporate ladder, but they had respected each other's work. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Greta. Mabel picked up the phone and dialed. Her heart pounded as she waited for Greta to answer. "What if she doesn't believe me?" Mabel whispered to herself. "What if she tells Mr. Hawk?" But she had to try. The lives of too many people were at stake for her to do nothing. "Hello?" Greta's crisp voice answered. Mabel took a deep breath. "Greta, it's Mabel Jenkins. I need your help." There was a pause on the line. "Mabel, I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know. I'm sorry to call out of the blue." "No, it's fine," Greta said quickly. "How are you doing? After everything?" "That's actually why I'm calling," Mabel said. "Could we meet somewhere? In person? It's important." Another pause. Mabel could almost hear Greta thinking, "This isn't about getting your job back, is it?" Greta finally asked. "Because I don't have any influence over that. Victor's mind is made up." "It's not about my job," Mabel said. "It's about something much more serious." "Please, Greta. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Greta sighed. "All right. But not anywhere near the office. Do you know the coffee cup on Maple Street?" "Yes, that's perfect." It was at least 10 blocks from Hawk Industries. "I can meet you there at 7:30 tomorrow morning," Greta said. "Before work." "Thank you, Greta. I'll see you then." Mabel barely slept that night. What if Greta didn't believe her? What if she went straight to Mr. Hawk? But she had to trust someone. And despite their differences, Greta had always been fair. The coffee cup was a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. Mabel arrived 15 minutes early, chose a table in the back corner, and ordered a cup of tea. At exactly 7:30, Greta walked in. Even at this early hour, she looked polished in a gray suit, her silver hair cut in a perfect bob. She spotted Mabel, nodded, and ordered a coffee before joining her. "You're looking well," Greta said, sitting down. "You don't have to be kind," Mabel replied with a small smile. "I know I look tired. I haven't been sleeping much." Greta took a sip of her coffee. "So, what's this about?" Mabel looked around to make sure no one was listening. "It's about Project Falcon." Greta's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Where did you hear that name?" Without a word, Mabel pulled the flash drive from her purse and placed it on the table. "Mr. Hawk asked me to back up some files before a system upgrade in 2019. I forgot to return it." Greta stared at the flash drive. "And you looked at the files. Wasn't a question, but Mabel nodded anyway. I did. I know about the money, the offshore accounts, and the Hawkcrete safety issues. Greta closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked 10 years older. I knew something wasn't right, she whispered. The numbers haven't been adding up for years. I tried asking questions, but Victor always had explanations. Relief flooded through Mabel. Then you believe me? Let me see what you have. Mabel pulled out her laptop and showed Greta some of the key files. The older woman's face grew grimmer with each document. This is worse than I thought, Greta finally said. Much worse. What should we do? Mabel asked. I tried talking to Mr. Hawk, but he won't see me. He's even banned me from the building. Greta snorted. That doesn't surprise me. He's been on edge for weeks, snapping at everyone, closing his door for private calls. So what do we do? Mabel repeated. Go to the police? Greta shook her head. Victor has half the police force in his pocket, and his lawyers would bury this before it ever reached a courtroom. The FBI? Maybe eventually, but they move slowly. And things at the company are worse than you know, Mabel. Greta leaned forward. The new Hawkcrete? It's already failing in some buildings. Small cracks now, but they're growing. The company is secretly paying contractors to make cosmetic repairs without telling the building owners. Mabel felt sick. Someone could get hurt. Exactly. And there's more. The company is planning to cut the retirement benefits for all long-term employees. They're calling it a restructuring, but really, they're just stealing from people who've worked there for decades. That's not fair, Mabel exclaimed. Several people looked over at them. She lowered her voice. Those people worked hard. They earned those benefits. Victor has changed, Greta said, using Mr. Hawk's first name in a way that Mabel never would. The board has him convinced that nothing matters except profit. The Victor you knew, the one who cared about his employees, who built the company, from nothing. That man is gone. Mabel shook her head, not wanting to believe it. People change, but not that much. Not if they were good to begin with. Power changes people, Mabel. Money changes them even more. Greta took another sip of her coffee. We need to be strategic about this. We need to get Victor alone, show him the evidence, make him understand what's at stake. He won't see me, Mabel reminded her. A slow smile spread across Greta's face. No, but he'll see me. And I know exactly where he'll be tomorrow. Where? Luciano's. It's his favorite lunch spot. Every Thursday at 1:1, like clockwork. The corner booth in the back. He thinks no one at the office knows about it, but I've been his executive assistant for 19 years. I know all his secrets. Mabel felt a tiny spark of hope. So, what's the plan? I'll make sure his schedule is clear at 1:00. You go to Luciano's and, accidentally, run into him. He can't cause a scene in public. He's too proud. And then what? Mabel asked. Show him the files. Remind him of who he used to be. Appeal to his better nature. Greta's face hardened. And if that doesn't work, tell him what will happen if these files go public. His reputation, his legacy, his freedom. You want me to threaten him? Mabel asked, shocked. I want you to make him understand what's at stake, Greta corrected. For him and for everyone else. Mabel bit her lip. This didn't feel right. But what choice did she have? What if he doesn't listen? She asked quietly. Greta's eyes were cold. Then we go to Plan B. What's Plan B? Let's hope we don't need it. Greta stood up and gathered her things. Tomorrow, Luciano's, 1 beat on PM. Don't be late. As Greta walked away, Mabel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the coffee shop's air conditioning. What had she gotten herself into? Mabel barely slept that night. By morning, she had changed her mind a dozen times. Go to Luciano's. Don't go to Luciano's. Trust Greta. Don't trust anyone. But what choice did she have? If people were living and working in unsafe buildings, she had to do something. Mabel spent the morning trying on different outfits. She wanted to look professional, not desperate. Strong, not angry. She finally settled on her gray pencil skirt and light blue blouse. Professional, but not intimidating. She pinned the silver hawk brooch to her collar, a reminder of better times. At 12:30, Mabel arrived at Luciano's, a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street. Through the window, she could see it was half full. Businessmen in suits, ladies who lunch. No sign of Mr. Hawk yet. Mabel found a bench across the street and waited, clutching her purse with the flash drive inside. At 12:55, a black town car pulled up in front of the restaurant. The driver opened the back door, and out stepped Victor Hawk. Even from across the street, Mabel could see he looked tired. His normally perfect silver hair seemed a bit messy, and his shoulders were slightly hunched. For a moment, she felt sorry for him. Then she remembered the files, the missing money, the unsafe buildings. Mabel waited until Mr. Hawk was inside, then crossed the street. Through the window, she saw the host leading him to a corner booth in the back, just as Greta had predicted. Taking a deep breath, Mabel pushed open the restaurant door. The host smiled at her. "Table for one?" he asked. "Actually, I just saw an old friend," Mabel said, pointing toward Mr. Hawk's booth. "I thought I'd say hello." Before the host could object, Mabel walked toward the back of the restaurant. Mr. Hawk was studying the menu, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He didn't look up until Mabel was standing right in front of his table. "Hello, Victor," she said quietly. Mr. Hawk's head snapped up. For a split second, surprise flashed across his face. Then his expression hardened. "Mabel, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you." Mr. Hawk glanced around the restaurant, clearly uncomfortable. "This isn't appropriate. I'm having lunch." 5 minutes, Mabel said. "That's all I ask. 5 minutes of your time after 20 years of mine." Something flickered in Mr. Hawk's eyes. Guilt, perhaps? He sighed and gestured to the seat across from him. 5 minutes, he said. Mabel slid into the booth. Up close, Mr. Hawk looked even more tired than she had thought. There were dark circles under his eyes and new lines around his mouth. A waiter approached, but Mr. Hawk waved him away. "What is this about, Mabel?" Mabel didn't waste time. "It's about Project Falcon." Mr. Hawk went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mabel reached into her purse and placed the flash drive on the table between them. "I think you do." Mr. Hawk stared at the flash drive. "Where did you get that?" "You asked me to back up some files before a system upgrade in 2019. I forgot to return it, and you looked at the files." His voice was dangerously quiet. "I did. That's company property. Those files are confidential. You had no right." "I had every right," Mabel interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "After 20 years of loyal service, I had the right not to be thrown away like yesterday's trash. I had the right to more than a 5-minute meeting and a cardboard box for my belongings." Mr. Hawk's jaw tightened. "Is that what this is about? Revenge? Because you're upset about being let go? Because if you think you can blackmail me..." "This isn't about me," Mabel said. It's about the people who might get hurt when those buildings start falling apart. It's about the employees whose retirement funds you're stealing. You don't understand the complexities of running a business like Hawk Industries. Mr. Hawk's voice was cold. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. The greater good? Mabel couldn't believe what she was hearing. How is stealing from your employees for the greater good? How is putting people's lives at risk for the greater good? You're exaggerating the situation. The Hawkcrete issues are minor. They're being addressed. With cover-ups and bribes, Mabel's voice rose, and several nearby diners looked over. She lowered her voice. That's not addressing the problem, Victor. That's hiding it. Mr. Hawk leaned forward. What do you want, Mabel? Money? Is that it? Because I can write you a check right now. More money than you'd make in 10 years. Mabel was stunned. You think I'm here for money? Everyone has a price. I'm here because it's the right thing to do. I'm here because people could get hurt. I'm here because the Victor Hawk I knew for 20 years would never put profit above people's lives. Something flickered in Mr. Hawk's eyes again. For a moment, Mabel thought she saw the man she used to know, the one who worked late to make sure orders went out on time, the one who remembered employees' children's names, the one who built Hawk Industries on quality and trust. But then his face hardened again. The world has changed, Mabel. Business has changed. I can't afford to be soft anymore. Soft? Mabel shook her head in disbelief. Is that what you call having a conscience? Being soft? Mr. Hawk sighed and pulled out his checkbook. How much will it take? Name your price. I don't want your money. Everyone wants money. He started writing a check. How does 500,000 sound? That should keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. Mabel stood up suddenly, angry. You still don't understand. This was never about money. She picked up the flash drive and put it back in her purse. I thought if I talked to you, if I reminded you of who you used to be, you might do the right thing. I see now I was wrong. Mr. Hawk grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave. What are you going to do, Mabel? His grip was tight, his face a mix of anger and fear. For the first time, Mabel realized he was scared. Scared of losing everything. Scared of being exposed. I'm going to do what you should have done, she said quietly. Fix the problem before someone gets hurt. Mr. Hawk let go of her wrist. You don't want to make an enemy of me, Mabel. I have resources, connections. I can make your life very difficult. Mabel looked at the man she had worked beside for 20 years, the man she had respected and admired, the man who now sat before her threatening her like a villain in a TV show. Goodbye, Victor, she said sadly. I truly hope you find your way back to the man you used to be. As Mabel walked out of Luciano's, her heart was heavy. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that she could reach him. That beneath the power and the money and the fancy suits, the good man she had known was still there. But that man was gone. And now she had to decide what to do next. Her phone buzzed with a text from Greta. How did it go? Mabel took a deep breath and typed back. We need Plan B. Greta's response came quickly. Meet me at the park, the one with the duck pond. 1 hour. Mabel found a coffee shop to wait in. She ordered tea but couldn't drink it. Her hand still tingled where Mr. Hawk had grabbed her wrist. She had never seen him like that before. Desperate, threatening. It scared her. An hour later, Mabel sat on a bench by the duck pond. Families were feeding the ducks. children laughing as the birds squabbled over breadcrumbs. Such a normal scene. Mabel wondered if her life would ever feel normal again. Greta arrived, carrying 2 coffee cups. She handed one to Mabel. "I thought you might need this," she said, sitting beside her. "Tell me what happened." Mabel described her conversation with Mr. Hawk, his denial, his attempt to buy her silence, his threats. Greta nodded grimly. "I'm not surprised. Victor hasn't been himself for years. The board has him convinced that nothing matters but the next quarter's profits. He was going to pay me $500,000 to keep quiet," Mabel said, still shocked by the offer. "That's nothing to him," Greta replied. "He made $12 million in bonuses last year alone." Mabel's eyes widened. $12 million, while he was cutting staff and reducing benefits? "Welcome to modern business," Greta said bitterly. "The people at the top get richer while everyone else struggles." She took a sip of her coffee. "So now we move to Plan B." "Which is what, exactly?" Mabel asked. "We need to take this information to someone with real power. Someone who can do something about it. Someone with a personal stake in seeing Victor Hawk exposed." "The FBI?" Mabel suggested again. Greta shook her head. "They'd move too slowly. By the time they built a case, Victor would have destroyed evidence and paid off witnesses. No, we need someone who already has resources. Someone who knows the industry." "Like who?" "Lynn Abruzzi," Mabel gasped. "The head of Abruzzi Construction? Mr. Hawk's biggest competitor?" "Exactly," Greta smiled thinly. "Lynn and Victor have a rivalry going back decades. They started their companies around the same time, but they couldn't be more different. Victor cuts corners to maximize profits. Lynn builds things to last. But going to a competitor? That feels like betrayal." Despite everything, Mabel felt uncomfortable with the idea. She had spent 20 years being loyal to Hawk Industries. More of a betrayal than what Victor did to you? To all the long-term employees he's planning to rob of their retirement? To the people who might get hurt? When those buildings start failing? Mabel was silent. Greta was right, but it still felt wrong somehow. "Look," Greta said more gently, "Lynn has connections to regulators, inspectors, even the Justice Department. She sits on industry safety boards. If anyone can get this fixed, quickly, it's her. Why would she help us? Partly because she'd love to see Victor taken down a peg, but mostly because Lynn actually cares about industry standards and public safety. She's been fighting against companies like Hawk Industries for years, ones that cut corners and bribe officials." Mabel thought about it. "I suppose it makes sense. I've already reached out to her assistant. Lynn can see us tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" Mabel was startled by how quickly things were moving. "We need to act fast. Victor knows you have the flash drive. He won't sit around waiting for you to use it." As if on cue, Mabel's phone rang. Unknown number. She showed it to Greta, who shook her head. Mabel declined the call. A minute later, a text came through. "Ms. Jenkins, this is Derek Stamos, head of security at Hawk Industries. Mr. Hawk would like to continue your conversation. Please call me back at this number." "They're looking for you," Greta said, her face serious. "It's not safe for you to go home." "What do you mean?" "Victor has resources, private security, people who can make problems disappear. You think he would hurt me?" Mabel couldn't believe it. "I think he's desperate. And desperate men do desperate things." Greta stood up. "You'll stay at my place tonight. It's safer." Mabel felt like she had stepped into some kind of thriller movie. This couldn't be real. Victor Hawk wouldn't hire people to hurt her. Would he? Her phone rang again. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Greta warned, but Mabel's finger had already hit the accept button. Hello? Ms. Jenkins? This is Tiffany. From Mr. Hawk's office? Yes, Tiffany. What is it? Mabel tried to keep her voice steady. I don't have much time, Tiffany whispered. But I think you should know. Mr. Hawk is destroying files. All the Project Falcon stuff. He came back from lunch really angry and started deleting everything. Why are you telling me this? Mabel asked, surprised. Because it feels wrong, Tiffany said. And he's hired people to find you. He says you stole company property. He seems really scared about what you might do. Mabel's blood ran cold. Thank you for telling me, Tiffany. I have to go. Please don't call this number again. The line went dead. Mabel looked at Greta, her hands shaking. We need to move fast. He's destroying evidence, and he's looking for me. Greta nodded grimly. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We meet with Lynn Abruzzi. Until then, you stay with me where it's safe. As they walked to Greta's car, Mabel couldn't help looking over her shoulder. Was someone following them? Were the men in that black SUV watching her? She had only wanted to do the right thing. How had it turned into this? Hiding from private. Security? Sleeping at a colleague's house? Fearing for her safety? What would tomorrow bring? Mabel hardly slept that night on Greta's sofa. Every car that drove by, every creak in the old apartment building made her jump. By morning, she was exhausted, but too wired to feel it. At 8:30 a.m., they arrived at the Abruzzi construction headquarters. Unlike the gleaming glass tower of Hawk Industries, this building was solid red brick with large windows. The lobby featured photos of Abruzzi projects, schools, hospitals, bridges, alongside framed safety awards. The receptionist led them to a conference room where Lynn Abruzzi was waiting. Mabel had seen Lynn in business magazines, but never in person. She was tall with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Greta, Lynn said, shaking her hand. And you must be Mabel Jenkins. Please, sit down. They sat at a round table. No power position at the head, Mabel noticed. A small but telling difference from how Mr. Hawk ran meetings. Greta tells me you have information about Hawk Industries, Lynn said. Specifically about safety issues with their Hawkcrete product. Mabel nodded and placed the flash drive on the table. Everything is on here. Emails about bribing inspectors, falsified safety reports, details about moving company money into offshore accounts. Lynn picked up the flash drive. May I? Mabel nodded, and Lynn plugged it into a laptop. For the next 15 minutes, she studied the files, her face growing darker with each click. Finally, she looked up. This is worse than I thought. These buildings could collapse. People could die. Can you help? Mabel asked. Lynn made a quick phone call. Jack, I need you and your team in the conference room. Now. And call Rita from legal. Within minutes, the room filled with people, engineers, lawyers, and to Mabel's surprise, 2 people who identified themselves as federal agents. Lynn sits on several safety oversight committees, Greta explained quietly to Mabel. She has contacts. For the next hour, Mabel answered questions about the files, about Mr. Hawk, about Hawk Industries. The evidence was strong enough that the agents were preparing to move immediately. We'll need your formal statement, one agent told Mabel. But we have enough here for search warrants. As they left Lynn's office building, Mabel saw a news crew setting up in the lobby. On a nearby TV screen, a breaking news banner flashed, Federal agents raid Hawk Industries over safety and fraud allegations. It was happening. It was really happening. They'll want to interview you eventually, Greta said. But for now, Let's all get you somewhere safe. 3 months later, Mabel still hadn't found a new job. Her savings were almost gone. The investigation into Hawk Industries had made national news, and no company wanted to hire the secretary who had blown the whistle on her boss. Even if they admired what she did, they feared she knew too many secrets. Mabel was at her kitchen table, looking at apartment listings in cheaper neighborhoods, when the mail arrived. Among the bills was a thick envelope with the Abruzzi Construction logo. Inside was a letter from Lynn Abruzzi. It offered Mabel a job, not as a secretary, but as the head of a new department focused on corporate ethics and employee welfare. The salary was twice what she had made at Hawk Industries. But there was something else in the envelope. A newspaper clipping about Victor Hawk. After his arrest, he had confessed to everything. The article said he was cooperating with authorities to make amends. The article quoted him, "I lost my way. I forgot what matters. It took losing the most valuable person at my company to realize how far I'd fallen." And the biggest surprise of all, Victor Hawk had established a fund for all employees affected by his crimes. Each long-term employee would receive compensation and guaranteed retirement benefits. The fund was called the Mabel Jenkins Foundation, and with it came a handwritten note from Mr. Hawk. "You were right. It was never about the money." Mabel sat at her kitchen table, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness or even happiness, but of understanding. Sometimes, being fired isn't the end of your story. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of something bigger than you ever imagined. Mabel picked up the phone to accept Lynn's job offer. She had spent 20 years being loyal to a company. Now she would spend the next chapter of her life being loyal to what really mattered, doing the right thing, no matter the cost. And somewhere, in a minimum security prison, Victor Hawk was finally remembering that too. That was the end of this story. Where are you listening from? If you enjoyed the video, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories like this one. Don't forget to share with your friends and family to spread kindness and awareness. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life.